can almost feel that ocean air already. Alright, time to get started on today's project. Today I'm going to be making a 2-part silicone mold of this. This is what's called a lion's paw clamshell. If I ever have to do a haunt based around the ocean, being able to make non-organic copies of this will come in handy. I'm going to start by cutting out a piece of styrofoam that will become the base of the box that I will pour the silicone into that will make the mold of the shell. I'm making this project as an overpour mold. This means that when I'm pouring silicone for a different project, I will keep this nearby so that if I mixed up any extra silicone, I can pour it in here and it won't go to waste. Next, I'm going to cut the sidewalls for the mold box. I cut them so that there will be about a ½ inch of extra space above and below the mold subject. Now I cut the strips down to the sizes that I'll need to make the mold box and number them so that they won't get mixed up. Next, I'll use hot glue to securely glue down each piece of the mold box, making sure to fill in all the gaps, because silicone is very sneaky, and it will leak out of a pinhole if you let it. With the mold box done, it's time to roll out some clay. The clay that I'm placing at the bottom of the mold box will allow me to press the shell down into it, which will create a seal around the edge of the shell. This way the silicone won't fill in the void inside the shell. I can also press registration divots into the clay, which will allow me to line up the 2 halves of the mold when casting. Apologies for the bad camera angle for this bit. Sometimes I have 3 cameras recording and I still forget to work on my project where the camera can clearly see what I'm doing. With that, it's time to finally press the shell down into the clay base. The last step before I pour some silicone is for me to use this marker to press the registration divots into the clay. To start, I pour a thin layer of silicone over the mold subject and let gravity stretch it out very thin. This pops many of the bubbles close to the mold subject and will hopefully give me a bubble-free mold. Since this project is an overpour mold, that means that all the silicone that I'm pouring was mixed for different projects. Most of these first pours were for when I was working on the bowling pin mold. Next, I'll open up the bottom of the mold, clean out the clay, and pour the second half of the mold. Fortunately, the clay has dried, which makes cleanup so much easier. When I was placing the clay, I accidentally made an undercut around the edge of the shell. This undercut could end up being a problem when putting the two halves of the mold together, so I'll have to cut it back to minimize it. Much better. Next, I'll glue on some dowels, which will act as pour spouts and vents when casting. Lastly, I'm going to spray some mold release. If I didn't spray the mold release, the two halves of the mold would get stuck together, and I would have a fancy block of silicone with the shell encased inside. Success! It came out perfectly. Now it's time to make a box that will hold the two halves of the mold together. I started with cutting out the base of the box. After that, I'll cut out some strips that will be used for the sides of the box. Using the markings that I made, I cut the strips into the pieces that I'll need to make the sides of the box. When I cut the strips to make the sides of the box, I intentionally made them shorter than the silicone mold. That way, the lid of the box will be able to clamp the two halves of the mold together when casting. Next, I need to drill holes in the wooden lid that line up with the holes in the silicone mold. Edges cut into melamine can be very sharp. Don't ask me how I know this. With all of the edges smoothed out, it's almost ready to start making some shells. I'll be using some epoxy resin to make shells this time. I added some metallic powder to the mix to color the resin to approximate the original color of the shell. I poured the resin into the mold until it was overfilled. This way, when the pressure from the pressure pot pushes the resin into the mold, there will be some extra to take the place of any air bubbles that might have been trapped in the mold. Everything seems to have cured properly. Time to crack this thing open and see what I got. The extra resin locked the shell into the mold, so I just decided to drill it out instead of risk breaking the thin casting. One final step is to clean everything up with my sander and a Dremel. And there they are. I made one more white pigmented shell off camera. It turns out that the metallic powder wasn't anywhere close to the original color, but since I cast this white pigmented shell, I can paint it and get much closer to the original color if I wanted to. Overall, this project was a nice break from the more complex projects that I've been taking on lately. I can use the casting from this mold in set design or for costuming purposes. I hope that everyone enjoyed a more simple project like this, and I'll catch you all next time. Thanks for watching!